There's a moment most men never see coming. It doesn't look like betrayal. It doesn't scream like anger or explode like a fight. It's quiet, subtle. A hesitation in your chest when you realize you're no longer safe where you once poured everything. That hesitation is where the aging begins. Not the kind you see in the mirror, the kind you feel in your soul, the kind that makes mornings heavier, laughter thinner, and silence unbearable. It's not the pain of being alone. It's the ache of still being present where you've already been erased. You keep telling yourself she's just tired, that stress changed her, that if you give more, that if love harder, or stay silent a little longer, maybe she'll come back to the warmth you remember. But she's not cold by accident. She's studying your silence, measuring your loyalty, seeing how much of yourself you'll set on fire just to keep the illusion alive. And somewhere deep inside, you know this isn't love anymore. It's a slow negotiation with your own self-respect. Most men stay because they fear the alternative, not being alone, but admitting they built a life around someone who stopped choosing them long ago. It's not her rejection that haunts you. It's the betrayal of your own silence. The quiet pact you made to not disturb the peace, even as that peace turned into a prison. You called it patience, but it was fear. You called it loyalty, but it was neglect, not hers, yours. Zeno of Citium, the father of Stoicism, was shipwrecked. Everything he owned, gone. But in that ruin, he found philosophy, found himself. He didn't rebuild the ship. He became the kind of man who didn't need one. That's what this is about. Not fixing her, not begging for clarity, but standing in your own wreckage long enough to realize maybe you weren't destroyed. Maybe you were being refined. Epictetus said, if someone succeeds in provoking you, realize that your mind is complicit. That's not blame. That's freedom. Because once you understand that your suffering doesn't come from what she did, but from your refusal to let go of what she no longer is, then you're finally free to choose peace over fantasy, dignity over hope, presence over pain. This video isn't here to punish her. It's not here to make her the villain. It's here to unchain you from the silent sentence you've been serving, the one where you've stayed too long, given too much, and lost yourself inch by inch. If she did this, it's not about revenge. It's not even about her. It's about remembering the man you were before your silence became your shame, and choosing finally not to fix, but to walk quietly with your soul intact. It didn't start with distance. It didn't start with betrayal. It started with interruption. Mid-sentence, mid-thought, mid-feeling, you spoke, and she pivoted the conversation. You reached, and she redirected her attention, not once, not twice, but often enough that it began to feel normal. That quiet erosion of presence, that's where it begins. Not in chaos, not in cruelty, but in the slow grind of being made emotionally irrelevant. She didn't say you don't matter, but her eyes did. Her tone did. That casual glance at her phone while you tried to speak about your day. That soft sigh when your story took more than a few seconds. That shift in her posture, as if your voice asked for too much space. These are not accidents. These are signals. And each one taught you something you didn't deserve to learn. That your inner world wasn't worth her attention. Over time, you stopped finishing your thoughts. You edited yourself mid-sentence. You delayed the truth to keep her from rolling her eyes. And maybe you told yourself you were keeping the peace, but what you were really doing was disappearing. You were teaching yourself to shrink in the presence of someone who once invited your fullness. What hurts the most isn't that she interrupted, it's that you adjusted. There's a term for this in psychology: micro-invalidation. Small moments that tell you, moments, quietly and consistently, that your emotions don't belong. But you don't need a diagnosis to know what it does to a man. It hollows him out. It makes him a guest in his own story. It makes him apologize for needing space, for feeling deeply, for trying to connect. And worst of all, it teaches him to endure in silence, because speaking up has become a risk. You might be waiting for something loud to call betrayal, an affair, an insult, a final argument. But the truth is, most betrayals don't come with sound. They come with silence, indifference, repetition. They don't break you all at once. They wear you down like rust, invisible at first, until one day the foundation no longer holds. Until one day you wake up next to someone who stopped seeing you, long before they stopped speaking to you. And in that quiet undoing, you're left holding a version of yourself that still remembers who you were before you started apologizing just for existing. That's not overreacting. That's not being too emotional. That's waking up to the truth. You've been grieving your own presence in a room you never actually left. It didn't feel like disrespect at first. It felt like tension, like fatigue, like the weight of daily life pressing in on both of you. You gave her space. You gave her time. You told yourself she was overwhelmed, that her silence was circumstantial, that if you stayed steady, stayed supportive, it would pass. But it didn't pass. It deepened, not because she was tired, but because she was watching. She didn't get colder by accident. She was studying something, not maliciously, but methodically. She was observing how much of yourself you would give without asking for anything back, how far you would bend to stay needed, how much affection you would offer without receiving respect. It was never about her mood, it was about your threshold, and she found it, quietly, efficiently, without ever raising her voice. There's something cruel about how calm it was, how she started treating you like a function, not a man. You weren't her anchor, you were her utility, useful when needed, silent when dismissed, present but no longer seen, and you tolerated it, not because you're weak, but because you believed. Because men like you don't walk away at the first sign of discomfort. You endure, you hope, you wait for the version of her that loved you to return. But respect doesn't end with betrayal. It ends with indifference, with the slow fade of eye contact, with one-word answers, with the absence of curiosity. She stopped asking how you were. She stopped noticing when you changed. You could have walked into the room wearing armor or scars, and she wouldn't have looked up. That wasn't stress. That was detachment. And you knew it. Somewhere in your chest, you knew it. There's a chemical reality behind this. Chronic emotional stress dulls perception. You stop trusting your gut. You start rationalizing distance. You blame yourself for her withdrawal. You think, maybe I wasn't loving enough. Maybe I wasn't patient enough. But no, you were more than enough. She just stopped seeing value in your presence. And you kept trying to prove it anyway. That's the real wound. Not that she changed, but that you didn't. That you kept showing up, hands full of affection, hoping it would buy back attention. But love offered where respect has died becomes desperation. And no man deserves to live in that space, where every gesture is ignored, and every silence feels like a verdict. She didn't pull away for no reason. She pulled away to see if you'd follow, and you did, until you couldn't anymore. There's a point where words stop serving you, where explaining only drains, not heals, where every attempt to clarify is met with indifference, and every plea to be understood is folded into the same silence that already surrounds you. That's when a man must learn what he was never taught, that silence isn't weakness, it's command, it's composure, it's a line drawn in stillness, not anger. You wanted to fix it. Of course you did. You were raised to believe that if something is broken, you repair it, that love is effort, that staying means fighting. But what no one told you is this: some things die quietly, and no amount of explaining revives what has already turned cold. Not because you failed to express yourself, but because the space where your words used to matter is no longer there. There's a form of strength that doesn't speak. It watches, it listens, it endures, not because it's powerless, but because it's sovereign. Zeno didn't preach with fury. He walked in stillness. His presence taught more than his voice. And you too must realize that not every wound deserves an audience. Not every betrayal deserves a reaction. Some moments call for absence, not retaliation. Distance, not dialogue. In modern terms, this isn't retreat, it's restoration. Neuroscience confirms it. Emotional withdrawal under pressure isn't avoidance. It's clarity. It's the nervous system protecting the mind from overstimulation, from unnecessary exposure. And that silence you offer? It isn't punishment, it's protection. It's a sanctuary you build when the world around you stops offering one. She may say, you're cold, distant, detached. Let her. You're not here to convince her of your value anymore. You're here to protect what's left of it. Because when a man falls into the habit of explaining his worth to someone who already stopped listening, he begins to forget it himself. Your silence must now say what words no longer can. I've seen enough. I've felt enough. And I will not plead to be seen again. That's not emotional shutdown. That's masculine restraint. That's choosing peace over performance. It's not the absence of feeling. It's the control of expression. It's not about winning the argument. It's about refusing to enter a war where your soul is the casualty. So you step back, not because you gave up, but because you finally remembered your presence is not free. You felt it slipping. The warmth, the welcome, The silent bond that once made her reach for your hand without thinking. And instead of stepping back to breathe, you stepped in, deeper, harder. You loved more, spoke softer, gave endlessly. You thought, maybe if I show her I'm still here, she'll remember who we were. Maybe if I give more, she'll feel safe enough to come back. But she wasn't looking for more love. She was testing your dignity, not to hurt you, but to see if you would notice. And you didn't. You kept pouring from a cup she'd stopped drinking from, not because you were weak, but because no one taught you the difference between devotion and self-abandonment, between being a man of heart and a man on his knees. Men often respond to emotional absence with more affection, more messages, more plans, more attempts to recreate what was already gone. But love offered where respect has died is not connection. It becomes performance. And every time you offer yourself to someone who has emotionally turned away, you teach her and yourself that your presence is negotiable, that your worth is discounted under pressure. That's not love. That's desperation wearing loyalty as a mask. Masculine leadership doesn't mean overgiving. It means presence with purpose. When a woman disconnects and you respond by giving more than she's asking for, you're no longer leading, you're compensating. And she feels it. She may not say it. She may not even know how to explain it. But deep down, she senses the shift, that you're now trying to buy back the intimacy she no longer offers freely. And here's the truth that cuts deep. No man can earn back dignity through overcommitment. You can't rescue a relationship by sacrificing the core of who you are. Because the moment your love becomes a form of pleading, it ceases to be love. It becomes noise, clutter, background to her indifference. What once made her feel safe now makes her feel suffocated, because the strength she once admired has turned into availability without boundary. You must remember this. Your presence is not a favor. It is a gift. And like all sacred things, it must be placed where it's valued. Your love should never feel like negotiation. Your time should never become a transaction. When respect disappears, the only way to restore it is to withdraw what became too easy to ignore, and let her feel the silence where you once stood. Let her notice the absence she thought would never come. He didn't slam the door. He didn't shout. He didn't give a long speech filled with final declarations or explanations. He simply woke up one morning, made breakfast for his children, left a note with no anger in the ink, and walked away. No announcement, no closure, just a man who finally saw that staying had become a slow form of self-erasure and chose silence over self-betrayal. There's a belief that strength looks like confrontation, like one last stand, like telling her everything she failed to understand. But real masculine strength doesn't seek drama. It doesn't need an audience. It arrives like the sunrise, inevitable, calm, irreversible. Because when a man reaches that quiet knowing in his chest, when he stops hoping and starts seeing, he no longer needs her to agree. He only needs to leave with his soul intact. It wasn't revenge, it wasn't punishment. It was the final rite of passage, the moment he became his own sanctuary. For too long, he had made his peace depend on her affection. For too long, he had stayed visible in a house where he'd become emotionally unseen. But that day, he chose differently. Not out of bitterness, but because he remembered the man he was before he was reduced to a version she tolerated. And that's the shift most men never reach, because they wait for her to understand, for her to soften, for her to say something that validates the pain. But healing doesn't begin with her recognition. It begins with your release, with your quiet refusal to carry what no longer serves, with your decision to stop arguing for space in someone else's world and start reclaiming your own. There is a certain nobility in leaving quietly, not because you're afraid of conflict, but because the war was never worth fighting. Because the peace you need now isn't in her apology, it's in your absence. You don't owe her a dramatic ending. You don't owe her the performance of your departure. You owe yourself the dignity of disappearing without rage, without noise, without compromise. He didn't leave because he stopped loving her. He left because he started loving himself again. And some goodbyes don't come with words. They come with a final breath, a calm step, and the closing of a door that never should have stayed open so long. She didn't need to understand. She never did, but now he does, and that's enough. You thought silence meant surrender, that not responding would make you look weak, that walking away without a final word would be misinterpreted. But silence is not absence. It's a message. It's presence reshaped into stillness. It's the voice of a man who no longer negotiates his worth, not because he doesn't care, but because he finally does. Most men assume that if they don't speak, they won't be heard. But there's a different kind of volume in silence. It echoes, it unsettles, it fills the space where noise once distracted. And for the woman who once ignored your words, your silence becomes a mirror, not of who you were, but of what she dismissed. Every unanswered call, every unread message, every unopened door she once took for granted, now lingers in the absence. Psychologically, absence breeds projection. She will start to feel the things you no longer say. She will wonder what your silence holds, what you've seen, what you've accepted, what you've let go of, not because you stopped caring, but because you stopped pleading to be cared for. And in that quiet gap between who you were and who you've become, a powerful lesson unfolds. Your presence was never guaranteed. Silence, when it comes from a man who has tried everything, is not withdrawal. It is conclusion. It is the final act of self-respect. It says, I gave, I endured, I waited, and now I refuse. Not out of anger, but out of clarity. Because explaining yourself to someone committed to misunderstanding you is no longer noble. It's emotional suicide. And no man should die daily just to be heard in a room that has already gone deaf. She may never say it, she may never show it, but she will feel it. The sudden absence of your emotional labor, the calm where there used to be persuasion, the stillness where she once expected pursuit. That is what silence teaches, the weight of what was lost, the cost of what was taken for granted, and the unshakable truth that a man in full possession of his dignity no longer raises his voice to be chosen. Your silence isn't passive, it's active, it's firm, it's deliberate. It speaks louder than any argument, not in volume, but in finality. Because when a man stops explaining, stops reacting, stops showing up in spaces that dishonor him, he becomes immovable, and in that immovability, he becomes undeniable, not loud, not vengeful, just gone. And in his absence, everything he once carried is finally felt. There are scars that never fade, not because you didn't try to forget, not because you held on to the pain, but because some wounds are not meant to disappear. They're meant to stay, not as reminders of what broke you, but of what rebuilt you. You've been told to move on, to let it go, to heal and grow. But what if healing doesn't always look like forgetting? What if healing is learning to stand beside the pain without bowing to it? You keep revisiting the moments, the silence, the dismissal, the way she looked at you like a stranger. Not because you enjoy the memory, but because a part of you still wants to understand it, still wants to make sense of how something so intimate could become so distant. But maybe it's not clarity you're missing. Maybe it's acceptance, not of the betrayal, but of the truth that you stayed too long in a place where you were already forgotten. Some pain isn't meant to be fixed. It's meant to be honored, to be felt fully, and then folded into who you are, like a landmark, like a stone on the path. Not something to carry with shame, but something to revisit with reverence. Because that pain, the one you still feel in your chest when you think of how far you bent to stay loved, that pain is the evidence that you tried, that you gave, that you believed, and that you survived. Zeno was shipwrecked. He didn't recover what was lost. He didn't rebuild the ship. He used the ruin as foundation, as philosophy, as life. And so must you. The relationship didn't survive, but you did. And in that survival is something far more sacred than forgetting. It is transformation without denial. It is peace without perfection. It is strength without the need to erase what hurt you. You are not broken because it still aches. You are not weak because it still echoes. You are human. And more than that, you are becoming. Not in spite of the wound, but through it. Let others chase forgetting. Let them numb themselves into pretending. You will stand beside your scar. Not with bitterness, not with shame, but with the quiet authority of a man who walked through fire and came out carrying the flame. This isn't about getting over it. This is about no longer needing to. About realizing that your pain is not your identity, but your initiation. And the moment you stop trying to return to who you were before the fall is the moment you begin to rise as who you were meant to become. Not clean, not untouched, but undeniable, whole, even with the cracks. Especially because of them. She didn't just betray your trust. She betrayed something far more sacred, your sense of being irreplaceable. She crossed a line not only through her actions, but through her absence, through the way she stopped meeting your eyes, through the way she made you feel like your presence was optional. that your pain was inconvenient, that your heart was no longer worth holding. And maybe for a long time you accepted it, justified it, carried it like a secret, because the idea of losing her felt worse than losing yourself. But what you didn't see then, and what you must see now, is that the longer you stayed where your dignity wasn't safe, the more you disappeared. Not physically, not all at once, but piece by piece, until the man you used to be could barely look back at you in the mirror. Zeno didn't go back to the shipwreck. He didn't swim through the ruins hoping to find something salvageable. He let the ocean take what it wanted, and he started over, not as a man rebuilding what was lost, but as one becoming what could never be taken. That's your task now, not to mourn what didn't survive, but to honor the parts of you that still can. The parts she couldn't see, the parts you forgot were yours. Seneca said, "A man who suffers before it is necessary, suffers more than necessary." And maybe you've done that. Maybe you've rehearsed the pain, replayed the silence, relived the moments she walked away without ever moving her feet. But now the suffering ends, not because she returns, not because she apologizes, but because you decide that your peace matters more than her understanding. So picture it. One last time, you stand, you leave the room without a sound, and for the first time, the silence follows you, not because it's empty, but because it's full of everything you once gave away. Dignity, clarity, weight. The storm she created you now carry, not as chaos, but as calm. If she did this, if she erased you slowly, quietly, repeatedly, then understand this. It's not about her anymore. It's about your final act of silent self-respect. Not a scream, not a statement, just a step forward, alone, whole, unapologetic, and finally, free.